Hi, welcome to Mr. Rowley's Virtual Music Classroom. This lesson is the second lesson in the series for songwriting. In the first lesson, we learned how to take words. We had written some words, and then we set some of those words to rhythms. We used the first strophe of a poem or a song. The words were written, but no music was written yet, and we set it to rhythm. And today we're going to learn how to take that rhythm and those words that we created in the last lesson and turn them into a melody, or add pitches to them so they turn into a melody. We're going to go about that process. I want you to remember that this process is not one that everybody uses when songwriting. This is my process. I am going to use two different tools, and I don't always use just these two tools. When I'm writing songs, I usually either use the piano or I use the guitar. I'm going to write half of this, or show you half of this to the piano and how I would go about that, and half with the guitar. The other thing that you need to understand is that some of the strategies that I'm going to show today, you will need to have some background information. I told you in songwriting lesson 1 that you would need to have an understanding of writing rhythms. Today you're going to need to have an understanding of pitch, and not just pitch and the names of pitches and things like that, but you also understand a little bit about singable intervals. We're going to talk about intervals a little bit, and then we're going to talk about range, and we're going to talk a little bit about key, which is related to scales. There are music theory lessons on this. The last music theory lesson that I posted onto my channel here was about intervals, and the next one, which I'll be doing next week or the week after, will be about scales and key signatures. And then after that, you'll need to have some understanding of keys. And that again relates to key signatures. So some of this information may be a little advanced for you. There will be music theory lessons you can reference to help you learn that stuff. So don't worry, you'll see my process on how we add pitch to the rhythms for the song, which we've already began. The first thing that you may need to know is that most songwriters spend a lot of time with whatever instrumental tool that they're using to write pitch. Some people have a good enough ability to sing pitch and then write what pitches they're singing down without using an instrument. I'm not one of those. I need to use a tool, either a piano or a guitar. You could use any instrument, actually. And when I talk about composition, this is very similar to composing a piece of music that's just for an instrument, in that you're not worrying about words. But you do need to play around a little bit. You need to experiment. And I'm not going to bore you with that part of what I did, but I will tell you a couple of things. I'm writing this song so I can sing it, and I also know that it can be sung by little children. So I'm picking a key that I normally write in. The keys I usually use are G, F, D sometimes, depending on the range for the kids. C, sometimes again it's kind of low, but it kind of depends on the melody itself. So those are the keys that I tend to write in for songs. And they fit my voice. That's the other reason. I don't normally go into A or E, which are other common songwriting song keys. But you can write a song in any key, whichever one fits your voice, and everybody's voice is a little bit different. Remember, though, that you can write a song in any key, and then you can change the key later. Again, that will come up with key signatures and understanding the fifth circle of fifths and scales and that. So just understand that I have chosen the key of G for today when working on this song, and it could change. Right now, I'm thinking it's in the key of G. The other thing that kind of starts out the whole process is sometimes I write with chords as I'm figuring out the melody. I'm just kind of singing along with chords because I think that they fit. That comes from being a songwriter for 30 plus years and being able to do that on the fly. I'm not going to approach it this way. I'm going to think back to when I first started writing songs and a little bit about how the words inflect into how I write melodies, and that's important. I'm going to act like I don't know how to play chords on either the piano or the guitar right now, and I'm just trying to figure out what the melody is. That being said, the words, like I said in the last lesson, where the words can help determine the rhythm with your strong and weak beats and your strong and weaker words, that's also true of melody. When you're writing a melody, you want it to have motion and direction. I was once told by one of my composition professors when I was getting my master's degree, Dr. David Asplin, when writing a melody, he says it always should have a direction, up or down, it doesn't matter. And sometimes you're going to have direction that is, it gets to one peak and then there may be another peak. That could happen in songwriting as well. When writing songs, though, it usually stays in the range of the singer. And your highness or lowness in pitch sometimes is determined by the words or the mood that you're trying to determine with the song. A rhythm is a little bit a part of that too. And like I say, we already wrote the rhythm. And so as I look at the words that I'm working with today, again, these are words that we already had. The words that we have right now, it's spring in the valley, snow and ice melt away, rivers and streams run high and mighty, a winter world comes awake. That is one strophe or one section of the song. This is a poem that is very strophic in its form. That means that each section of the poem, each set of lines of the poem are similar in length, similar in syllables. And so right now I'm not determining what the form of the song is. It could be A-B. It could be strophic, just A throughout. It could be through composed, where every strophe is a little bit different. I'm not sure where it's going yet. For right now, I'm only determining what goes in the first strophe of the song. This is the opening statement, the first theme, and we'll go on from there. With it being the first theme, though, the ending of either halfway through this musical phrase or at the ending of this particular musical phrase, that ending, or in music we call that a cadence, may determine what the next strophe or the next line of music might be. So remember that repetition in music is important, and that's true of melody as well. So as you're playing around, figuring out what it might sound like to you, keep those things in mind and use the words to your advantage. Each word will give us an idea of what the pitch might be, depending on the mood or the emotion that you want to inflect with your. So after doodling around a bit as I worked on this song, I came up with the fact that it was in the key of G. I also noticed from our rhythms that we wrote that the first note is a pickup note, which tells me more than likely that that pickup note is going to be in relation to the next pitch, which is the downbeat of the next measure, the first full measure of the melody. That pitch will probably be based on what we call the tonic of the key that we are writing this song in. In the key of G, the tonic pitch is G. Now, usually, not always, in fact, maybe just even less, not even 50%, that first note of a melody in a song will be somehow related to the tonic pitch. And when I say related to, it may not be that pitch. It could be in that chord. So the G chord would be the first chord in the song, and in the tonic chord. That kind of determines our tonal center, or our key that we're singing in. Now, that being said, if we think of it as a scale, the note G is the first note in the scale, or what we call 1. And the first chord in that scale is G, also referred to as 1. The next most important note in the key of G, G being the most important, the next most important is what we call the dominant, or the fifth note of the scale, D. There's G. So D, G, 5, 1, or D, G, 5, 1. It doesn't have to be that note, but I'm thinking for this song, that's what it's going to be. And I'm playing it right now in my octave. If I was doing it for children, it'd be up there. I'm going to play it down an octave so it's in my octave. Now, the first words, it's spring in the valley. Now that brings us to the next most important aspect of writing a melody, or I think most important. And I say next most, and they're all important, but to me, as I follow through my series of thought processes while I'm making up music, I think about a few things. First of all, I think about that 5-1 relationship. It's the most important melodic and harmonic relationship when creating a melody. But then we need to realize that this has to be singable, and this is where the intervals question comes in. Singable is really important. In the 4th lesson of the music theory series, I teach all the simple intervals. Those are the intervals within 1 octave. And we use a lot of intervals much more often than others, and some we don't hardly use at all because they just don't make any sense. But really what's important when it comes to writing a song is singability. So you would want to avoid lots of leaps, because when you have a lot of leaps, that means big spaces between notes in the melody. That makes it harder to sing. This is a children's piece, so it needs to be fairly easy to sing. Now, yes, my first 2 notes I'm thinking are this, D, G, 5-1, but, and that's a leap, but I probably won't follow that with another leap. In our culture and society, one of the most difficult songs to sing is the national anthem, Star Spangled Banner. And the reason it's hard to sing is because it starts with several leaps in a row. I always get concerned when I see, especially a young person, getting up to sing the national anthem a cappella. Unless they're pretty schooled and have practiced it a lot, you can get off key very quickly. When we hear the national anthem, the first few notes, every single one of those notes was a leap. That's really easy to get off key because of that, and it covers a wide range. It goes a whole octave and a third. That's a big range in the first 7 notes of the piece. So that's probably not something we would have as part of a children's song. And that's really important to understand. The most singable songs are what we call stepwise, meaning that we go from note to note of a scale or a key, a major scale in this particular song. We go note to note without any other notes in between within that scale. And we want to think about a key. We could think solfege, and I teach my young students solfege with do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, that, okay? Because that's the major scale. I'll use the G major scale to explain. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That gives you an idea of kind of the building blocks that I'm going to be putting the melody together with. Now, it was just 1 octave that I played, so I'm using that as my guide. Like I said earlier, I could sit down with a piano or a guitar and play chords underneath what I'm thinking the melody is going to be and kind of figure it out. And when we get to adding chords and harmonizing this, we'll talk about that even more later. But right now, let's just try to figure out these first few words and notes and with the rhythms that we have written. It's spring in the valley. Now, to me, it's spring in the valley. That's a positive, joyous thing. So I want in my mind, I want the melody to go up from low to high. It's spring in the valley. Kind of like that. It's spring in the valley. All right, I like that. So I got my first line of words, and I got some notes to it. Now I got to write them down so I don't forget them. And always remember, nothing is set in stone. This is your creation. You can go back and change it all you want. In fact, I might get through this and then scrap the whole thing because after a while I say, it's not speaking to me. That's part of being a creator. That's part of being a composer and a songwriter. You may like your words and you write the first music to it, and then after a while it just doesn't feel right. So you start over, start again. That's part of the process. It's a wonderful part of the process. That's being an artist. Trial and error, always trying new things out. Remember, I always tell my students when they're composing or songwriting that you are an artist. which is what we are as musicians and songwriters and composers, we tend to think of art as visual art. And a painter sits with a palette of paint with a brush, and they put the strokes on the canvas. Well, your canvas is, the world of sound. And your palette is also all those different colors of sound, pitches, timbres, what instrument's going to play what sounds and things like that. So I'm using my palette. And as painters sometimes too, they get into a painting and they don't like it and they toss it or they paint over what they just painted. Same thing happens with songwriting. So let's try that one more time. I've talked a little bit. See if does that still work? It's spring in the valley. I like it. So now I'm going to write it down. So as I write it down, I have I wrote the original rhythms in the Finale. I use Finale at my notation software that I use to write music. And so I printed it out, so I have the words and the rhythms written up here. And I'm just going to go down below and I'm going to write it out by hand first, and then later on I'll show it how I write it onto the computer so you can see it really good. So I'm writing the same rhythm, but I know that first pitch is a D. I'll write that D down there. And I know the next pitch is a G. And I got that right there. It's spring in. In is an A. It's spring in the is the note B. And then valley, it's the same pitches, and there's a leap there. It's spring in the valley. Skips up to a D. Now earlier I said that I knew that first pitch was going to be the first strong beat pitch was going to be a G, from the D to the G. Now, I had also said that tonic could be the tonic note, the note G, the first note in the G scale, G major scale, which is the key that we're in, and the D was the fifth. Now, I could have used any of the notes in the G chord. Actually, I could use whatever note I want and put a G chord underneath it if that's what I want, but that's what I'm choosing to do, is have that first strong beat be under the chord G, which we'll talk again more about that later. But I could have used a B or a D because those three notes are in that scale. But using the tonic is the strongest, and it's also the easiest for young voices to sing. Now, even though I have a low D in there, and then I have a high D, that's an octave. Now, that's about the maximum range I can put in one musical phrase with little voices. Remember, I'm writing this for like second and third grade students, so they're about 7 to 9 years old. Some of them can sing very well. Girls especially have a bigger range than the boys do. The boys have a big range, they just don't think they do. That's part of our culture today, is we think boys need to sing like men. They need to understand that they have children's voices and they sing like children. So I really work with them on that. And they actually boys have bigger ranges than they think. So, but you still need to keep the range squished. The bigger the range, that means the distance between your lowest pitch and your highest pitch needs to be fairly small. Pop music, popular forms of music, folk music, those kind of things, usually the range is fairly limited. When we go beyond an octave and a third, octave and a half, then we're getting into where it's more what I refer to as classical, or not classical, but symphonic singing, art singing, where there's a higher range. Some of the things that students may sing, for instance, at solo and ensemble contest. There's great contemporary works, but also the old arias from operas, or just art music, especially German Lieder from the 1800s. Those are all, with a lot of those pieces of music have a much wider range and do a lot of other things too that make them a little more complex and less popular music type sounding. But popular music is very valid and important, so don't get me wrong. That's what I write mostly, is popular songs or folk type songs. So, but again, those type of music tend to use shorter and smaller ranges. And especially when you're dealing with children's songs, you need to keep that range fairly small. So the next words is snow and ice melt away. So I got to know what came before it, and then pretty sure, because the rhythm's different, I'm probably going to change it. And I'm probably going to add some shape to my melody. So I think I'm going to go back down in pitch. See, I already kind of messed around with this before. Snow and ice melt away. I like that. Okay. Snow and ice melt away. So it starts on the C. Snow. And it just goes down the scale. This is all stepwise. So C, B, A, G, A, B. So if I put the two notes together, the two phrases together, it's spring in the valley, snow and ice melt away. And I'm going to do one more line of the poem with the piano, and then I'm going to show how this can also be done on guitar. So the next set of words is rivers and streams run high and mighty. Again, staying within the key, letting the words dictate how I want it to sound. I ended up going down and up with the last little phrase, with the snow and ice melt away. Lower than my highest pitch, just one step lower. Down to tonic. Snow and ice melt away. So I know that I want rivers to not be the pitch I ended on, but I do want it to be an easy way to get there. I'm going to keep it stepwise. I could leap if I wanted to make it a little more difficult, but I'm going to keep it easy. So I'm going to go down. Rivers and streams run high and mighty. I like that. There's the ending pitch. Rivers and streams. And then I'm going to use a little bit of a sequence where I just go stepwise up to that high pitch again. Rivers and streams run high and mighty. I like that. Kind of back up to that high pitch. There's some repeated notes in here too, which I think is an important concept to understand as well. We don't need to always be going all over the place. Sometimes it's appropriate to use repeated notes, especially if it fits the words. Rivers and streams run high. There's your repeated pitch. Another repeated pitch. Run high and mighty. So I'm staying in the first position in the guitar, so the notes are going to be an octave higher, but I'll sing it in my octave while I do it. So the last thing I wrote on the piano was high and mighty. High and mighty. And again, I want to stay stepwise, and I know that I want to go down, and I also know that I want to end on the tonic. It's the opening statement of the song, so to start on the tonic and end on the tonic, it's what I want to do. It makes sense. So again, high and mighty, a winter world comes awake. Let's try that again. High and mighty, a winter world comes awake. So I have some repeated notes in there. I like that. Makes it easier to sing. One more time. High and mighty, a winter world comes awake. And so now I have my melody. Winter world, repeated note, comes, and I like that I have that F sharp down there, awake. So, the other thing that is important here is that I'm thinking of what the harmony might be underneath it while I write this. Now, I have some experience doing that. What's going to happen with you if you don't have songwriting experience? You're probably going to sing along with your words, and because your background in music, whether it be singing along with the radio for however many years you've done that, or making up your own little songs in your head, more often than not, you're going to be in one key. You are going to have a lot of 5-1 relationships and maybe some other relationships, maybe the fourth note of the scale comes in there. And we'll talk a lot more about this when we talk about how we add chords to this and harmonize it later. But it will almost be automatic that that's going to happen for you. So get used to that. So the end of this, world comes awake. That is a 1 to a 5 relationship. But that's only a half step. What are you saying, Mr. Rowley? Well, another very important pitch in the scale is the 7th degree of the scale. The last one before we get to that last note. So remember, if I start on do, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That ti, do. That ti is really important because it always wants to go to do. Okay? If I'm here, do, ti, do, world comes awake, do, do, ti, do. Well, guess what? In the 5 chord, remember that 5, the D, if you build a chord on that 5 chord, that middle note of that chord is that leading, what we call leading tone, or that 7th degree of the scale, because it always wants to go back to the tonic. It's another music theory lesson, but it works with songwriting all the time. We will sing it because it's what feels good, especially when we're going back to the tonic. Now, I talked about cadences a little bit earlier, and the next lesson we'll talk even more about that, because sometimes you're going to have a cadence that doesn't sound like an actual ending, and that's okay. I once saw Van Halen in concert, and Eddie Van Halen is an amazing musician. I was about, 12 years old or so. First time, I think may have been their first tours, 1978. And I saw them in concert, and they sang at the very last song in the concert, they sang Jamie's Cryin', which was one of their famous songs early on in their career. And Eddie was playing his guitar, and they were singing the song, and they were ending the song, and he ended on a very high guitar note that happened to be the leading tone in that key that they were playing in. And then they walked off stage like it was the end of the concert. And by doing so, he made everybody in the audience have this anticipation and feeling that that wasn't the end. It was, and I remember feeling it. And I remember many, many years later in college learning about music theory, and the power of that leading tone, that 7th degree of the scale, was pretty cool, because I remembered back to that concert. And I remembered when they came back out 2 or 3 minutes later for their encore, they hit that final chord, and they made it feel like, there's the ending finally. Now we can get on to the encore song. It's that powerful of a feeling. And we'll talk more about that in music theory lessons, as well as when we start adding harmony to our song. Sometimes, though, you don't want the song or the section of a song to have that finality ending, that, okay, that's the end, we're now home, we feel good, and everything. Sometimes you want to leave it hanging a little bit. And sometimes even at the end of songs, you don't want to end on a tonic. That's your choice. You're the creator. You might end on the 6th degree of the scale or the 5th degree of the scale. And sometimes the emotions we get from that as a listener is what the composer wanted. And we'll talk about more of that later. So our next step that we're going to do with this is now start showing what it looks like on the computer and what it sounds like on the computer. So now I'm going to add the notes to the rhythm that we did before, and talk through while I do that. I've taken what I wrote down over there on the piano, my chicken scratch, and I'm going to add it to the finale, and then I'm going to listen to it. You should be able to hear a little bit of it when it plays, because the computer's going to play it so I can hear it. That's one of the things that's nice about notation software. I don't have the best voice. I can sing, but I'm not an awesome singer. And I like to have the notation software so I can hear what I've written. I can hear things in my head. And for years I wrote with not having software, and I figured things out just fine. Sometimes I play around with on an instrument, or I got much better with my ear training and much better with being able to see what I can see on a page, sing it in my head and understand, or create something in my head and be able to write it down through dictation. And I'm pretty close, been doing this for a long time. But if you're a beginning songwriter, you may not have those abilities, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, when you have notation software, you have that tool. Use it. We have it. I don't begrudge anybody creating by using the computer if they need to. I just watched a video about John Williams, the famous composer who wrote the Star Wars music and many, many, many other movies. Pretty much every movie Steven Spielberg has directed, John Williams has done the music for. He is one who still creates with pencil. And he admittedly, but he's 80 some years old, so it makes sense. Most of his life, he didn't have a computer to use. And about half of my life, I didn't really have a computer to use. But now I do, and I use it because it helps me create. And there's nothing wrong with that. I get a little frustrated with people who say, well, you're not a pure composer, a pure songwriter if you don't write with pencil and paper. Anybody can be a creator. We use the tools we have. So I'm going to use that and show that through what we're doing here. So I'm going to write the pitches in, and actually all I have to do is drag the notes. So I'm going to take the B. Oh, I still got to go over here. Okay. And I'm going to drag it down. Come on. There's our D. G. And the next one's an A. This is a tied note, so I got to drag the next one down too. Put the tie back on. And the next one's a B, and it was already a B. And go ahead and take care of these to get them up to D. Now the computer is, I got the setting on it to sing what we call an ah, so it sounds like someone's singing, kind of. And I can play it back. And actually, the computer's set to have it about what the tempo I want. I'm going to slow it down a little bit. So I'm actually going to put a tempo in. And now it should play the tempo I like. That goes with what I want. Okay, let's go ahead and finish it off, and then I'll sing along with the computer and see if it's how I like it. So this next one was a C. C, where are we at? C, B, A, G, A, B, C, B, nope, that's a B, not an A. G, oh, G, A, B. That's already there. So, this is an opportunity to talk about something I talked about over there. So, it's spring in the valley, snow and ice melt away. That's kind of the middle of this part of the song, middle of this musical phrase. And that doesn't end on the tonic pitch. It ends on the third degree of the scale. So when I get to adding harmony on this later, I might use a G chord, but I could use something else that has that B note in it. Or maybe a chord that doesn't have it and it is in contrast. There's lots of things I can do with that, but it doesn't sound like an ending. So take a listen to that. Let's just listen from the beginning to that section. Now, if I stop the song right there, that wouldn't sound like an ending. We'll compare and contrast that to the actual ending when we get there. Let's continue on. A, G. All right, so now we have all the notes written in. We got the song, we got an understanding. Here's what it sounds like, so you can get a sense of what it sounds like on the computer. For the first phrase, the first strophe of the song, it makes sense. Now it's time to start putting chords to it and start harmonizing it, which will be the next lesson. What I probably will do between now and then is I'll finish writing the rhythms and the melody for the rest of the song so we can find out what form it's going to turn into. I don't know yet. The strophes are all basically the same. Remember, a strophe is like sections of the poem. Verse to chorus, verse, chorus. This song really doesn't have a chorus to it. So that's why I think it's going to end up being a strophic song. So there may not be an A and a B section, although one of the strophes might have a little bit different melody to it. I'm going to play around and see if I like it and go from there. But I have to keep in mind, it's for children. It needs to be easy. There's a lot of stepwise motion in this piece. I like that. Even though the range is a little bit high, it goes between a low D one time to a high D two times, and pretty much everything else stays between G and C. So it doesn't have a very big range, and that's pretty good. It goes down to an F sharp one time, which is that leading tone we talked about. So it's not too hard. Not only could this be sung, I think I could even teach third graders possibly how to play it on their xylophones. So that makes it, to me, that's a way that I approach things when I'm writing for children's music. So I hope to see you on the next video. I think this is a pretty good step that you've taken. It takes time to do this, though. Don't beat yourself up if you're having a hard time adding pitch to your rhythm. Go slow, sing it to yourself. Try to match that pitch on that tool that I talked about, whether the piano or the guitar. If you play another instrument, I'm teaching a young lady right now that I said, hey, get your clarinet on and play along with. I had to teach her about the transposition thing, but once she kind of figures it out, then it may be easier for her to write it down. If you have a little bit of understanding of the piano or the guitar, which again, when I talk about scales in the next music theory lesson, which will be music theory lesson number 5, it's going to talk a lot about scales and how you can use those scales to help create your melodies. Until then, thanks. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and hope to see you again in the very near future. Bye. That lesson was a little longer than I thought it would be, but I hope you learned something and you can continue on your endeavors of songwriting. Please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.